This is 𝗨𝗵 Now with John and 𝗪𝗵𝘁𝗀𝗀𝗀.
Hello and welcome to today's program. We have a guest with us today who's been with us quite a few times, John.
Yes, and I enjoy our guest when he speaks because he's got good ideas.
And good ideas and good stories. We've got Dr. Mark Turnbull from Vanuatu. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you.
It's good to have you back.
Thank you, John and Rosemary. It's a pleasure to be here.
We get quite excited when Mark says, I'm coming to Australia.
You come over once or twice a year normally, or is it?
Well, I like to get over here as frequently as possible, but because of coronavirus, I had 2 years when we couldn't come. So this is my first attempt to come, and here we are.
Yeah,
So
it's really good. So
good to be back in Australia.
it's good to see you again.
Yeah.
And find out more about what's happening in Vanuatu as we go
hoping to
through.
share. Yeah, I'm looking forward to sharing a bit more. Yeah.
Very good.
You've got Mark's chosen a text, and it's found in Jeremiah chapter 1, verses 6 and 7. It's related to what he's going to be talking about, and leadership is something that is something we all need to consider, because when we are given the gospel mission, go ye into all the world, it's something we need to do. We need to take a role in sharing what God has called us to do. This text in Jeremiah chapter 1 starts in verse 6. It says, Then said I, Ah, Lord God, behold, I cannot speak, for I am a child. But the Lord said unto me, Say not, I am a child, for thou shalt go to all that I shall send thee, and whatsoever I command thee, thou shalt speak. It's a very comforting thought, isn't it, Mark?
Yeah.
Launching?
Yeah, that text, it means something to me because of, I think back to my baptism, when I was baptized. I was asked by the pastor to share a testimony. And at that time, I was brand new in the church and I had no experience in public speaking whatsoever. And so when he asked me to share my testimony, I didn't even know, wasn't too sure what a testimony was to start with. But he asked me to stand up and say something. And so now at that point, we just sung a hymn that they had sung, everyone had sung because I had requested it. They asked me which hymn was my favorite hymn. And it was the hymn which goes, I know whom I have believed. You know that hymn?
And I'm persuaded that he is able to
right. So I liked that hymn, and when I stood up, the words of that hymn were in my mind, and I didn't know what to say, because when I saw these people in front of me, a sea of faces staring at me, I suddenly realized that I didn't know what to say, and I really, really felt embarrassed. But the words of the song were in the back of my mind, so I thought, well, I better repeat the words. So I said 7 words, and the first word was and then I said, I know whom I have believed. And now that's old English, isn't it?
Yes.
And I would never have said it like that, but because I didn't know what to say. So that's all I said, and when I looked at all the people, that was all I could say, and I sat down. And the pastor was very gracious. He stood up and he said, thank you for your testimony. And then he went on with the service and I was baptized. So yeah, that's how it started for me. I was not really born to be a leader. I felt like, I feel like I believe that God has called me into leadership roles that I never dreamt that I would be involved in. That's why I chose that text.
But he gave you the ability.
Well, the Lord's obviously helped me and developed some leadership abilities in me, but I definitely didn't have that when I was baptized, that's for sure.
You know, Mark, I think it's important that you make the decision to do something and God equips you.
Yeah.
You never want to forget that. God is the one who equips you and enables you to do what he calls you to do.
That's it.
And it's exciting because when you put it into God's hands, life changes.
That's it.
Now, we will have people watching this program who have not seen you before.
Right, okay.
So let's just do a quick recap from when we spoke to you. I think the first time we talked about your background. You were born in Rhodesia.
Born in, Rhodesia, which is now Zimbabwe, that's in southern Africa. Yeah.
Yeah, just because you haven't got a distinct accent.
Yeah, because I've lived in so many places. I've lived in Australia a long time, and so I actually have 4 citizenships. I've had 4 citizenships. Zimbabwe citizenship, British citizenship, which I inherited from my father. Then I married Naomi and became an Australian citizen, and I'm still an Australian citizen. But we've also become dual citizens with Vanuatu. I'm now a Vanuatu citizen, so it's my 4th citizenship.
He can't make up his mind. I hope
exactly.
The one
exactly.
he's really wanting is a citizenship in heaven.
That's it. That's it. Yeah.
So down here it doesn't matter. You can just chop and change.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. Yeah.
And so, family of 4 children?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, Naomi and I had 1 child, and that's our daughter, but we've adopted 2 children.
Oh, no, I'm talking about when you were young.
Oh, sorry, when I was growing up, yeah, I was born into a family that I was the second born of 4 children, yeah.
Did you have any Christian upbringing, or, you know, when you...
I was brought up in the Roman Catholic Church, and
Okay.
we used to go to church every Sunday, so we're pretty faithful going to church, but as far as reading the Bible or understanding anything, yeah, I really was very confused as a Christian. I didn't understand what salvation was, why Jesus... One of the main questions that really I struggled with was, why did Jesus have to die? You know, I know that sounds like a pretty basic thing, but I could not understand what this Jesus dying on the cross was all about. I didn't understand that.
Because you weren't taught.
Yeah, the teaching's very sort of superficial, very sort of liturgical services with 5-minute sermons and not much content, nothing from the Bible. Basically, lots of talking, nice talking, but not much explanation. So I grew up believing that Christianity was good, that it was right, that I was a Catholic, that I was always going to be a Catholic. And I also, didn't understand why I was a Catholic or why I was a Christian. I just believed it was right and it was good, and that was about as far as it went.
I think I was in that same category too, because my parents were
Greek Orthodox.
Yeah, became Anglican, and so you know, it was just like you went and did the traditional same thing every time.
Yeah.
And there was a little bit of explanation, but I didn't know much.
No.
Really didn't.
Yeah, that's right.
You don't know much if you don't read the Bible.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, can we have a look at the photo of my family so the viewers can see that? There's a picture of myself with my daughter and my wife up on the top right-hand side, and then a picture of the whole family with the 2 adopted children underneath. So, that's the family unit. We're based in Vanuatu, northern Vanuatu. It's the remotest part of Vanuatu. And if we go to the second slide, you'll see a picture of Jeff Rich, who is the director of the ministry that we work with. We basically work with Layman Ministries, based in Idaho, and they have 7 projects around the world. Different projects. Ours is a medical aviation project, but there are other projects involving prison ministries, schools, television ministries, all kinds of different projects, but ours is the medical aviation one. And we work with Jeff, and we really appreciate being part of Layman Ministries.
So Mark, how long have you been working in this ministry?
We've been working in Vanuatu with Layman Ministries for nearly 17 years. The end of this year.
That's a long time.
So 16 and a half years now.
So you've seen it grow from nothing to something, and it's still growing. Is that right?
Yeah, we've gone through a lot of experiences in 16 and a half years of ministry. It's been just the most wonderful experience in our lives. Yeah.
I was going to say that a lot of 3ABN viewers would know Jeff Rich's face, because Layman Ministries has had its own program on 3ABN for many, many years. And 3ABN has been sort of like their way of getting their message out, as it has been for many ministries. But Layman's Ministries has been one of those.
One of the ministries that has always been connected with 3ABN.
Very good.
Yeah, so his face would be familiar
to many. Yeah.
So, as going back to you being the second birth in your family, did that equip you in any special ways for what you what you can see now that God has led you into, or was it something that God had to go a roundabout way to get you into what you're doing?
Well, my background, God used many things in my background to prepare me for my future. But one of the things that I felt that I didn't come to mission with was leadership qualities, because I was second born in the family. In our family, the firstborn was kind of like a leadership type figure, as in quite a few cultures and quite a few families. The firstborn is given the most responsibility, and that's kind of like a Bible thing too. In the Bible days, I think that's the way it was. The firstborn was looked upon as a leader among the siblings. And so I felt in our family that I was not given much responsibility, and I don't feel that I had any sort of role or opportunities to act as a leader. And so I never grew up with that mindset. I actually thought of myself as definitely a non-leader. And especially when it came to public speaking, like what happened in my testimony, that just illustrates how far away I felt from being comfortable as a leader and being able to communicate in public and things like that.
So it was sort of not a matter of too many chiefs and not enough Indians. You were one of the Indians. I
was definitely not looking at myself as a leader in any shape or form. But yeah, I discovered through mission that God's called everyone to lead.
That's right.
Because when you lead people to Christ, you're involved in leadership. And it's a kind of leadership that has many different layers. And there are physical leaders, or there are overt leaders who take positions and have authority and have certain roles as leaders. But in God's plan, everyone actually ends up leading in a sense and in a way. So that's what I didn't understand. It took me a long time to understand that. Yeah. So I really I believe that leadership is something that can be taught and can be learned, and that people who are not natural leaders, there are people who seem to have those natural capabilities. Maybe they've been introduced to leadership from a young age, but those who have not been introduced to leadership can learn and can be taught how to lead, and I think that's something that, yeah, it didn't really dawn on me until I got involved in mission. Can we have a look at some of the other slides that I have up there? One is a picture of Rui. This is the gentleman that, with a group, there was a group of people with Rui who actually introduced me to the Adventist Church. And he's a special guy. I've tried to stay in touch with Rui, and I appreciate this man and the group that was ministering to me when I met them on Circular Quay in Sydney. That's sort of, when I see that picture, it reminds me of what I was back then. I was so far away from being involved in mission and being prepared for mission.
And from really not really working with or walking with God in a daily life.
Well, I was yearning for spiritual things when I was younger, and I didn't really understand that. But when my father was killed in a car crash, it really threw me into a bit of a spin. And I started to sort of want to know more about God and wanted to give my life to Him, even though I didn't really understand what that meant. And it was only a short time after that that I met Rui and these people that were witnessing on Circular Quay down in Sydney. And
they were street preaching, were they?
They were street witnessing. Yeah. And that group, they just loved me into the church. And so that was a big step. Another one is, can we see the next slide? That's a picture of myself after I've been baptized, ended up going through medical school, became a doctor. That's actually a photo of the first cesarean section that I did. So that was a big day for me. And this was me getting involved in responsibilities that I'd never been involved in before. Can we go to the next one?
Nothing that you were prepared for.
Yeah, that's the first time I looked into the aircraft that we were donated. You can see on my face a green look.
No. I think it's the look of a child who just got a big, I said before, a big packet of candy for Christmas.
Yeah, when I looked in there, I was just totally amazed at what we had been donated. So God,
hang on, I've got a question to ask you. You're looking in there. Have you ever flown a plane?
Oh, yeah, I had 100 hours, but I was still very inexperienced as a pilot. Yeah. But when I looked in there, this plane worth $172,000 was donated to 𝗨𝗵 for our project. Yeah, that was quite a big day for me.
And you're going, I've got to fly this thing and look after it.
That's it. Can we go to the next slide? Just by way of introduction, we've adopted 2 children, and this is the first child that we adopted, which was a little boy. His name's Moriah.
He was certainly little in one of those photos.
Yeah, just a little friend. And we have, we've changed so much by being involved and taking on responsibilities. First of all, becoming a father was a big thing. Then adopting a child was a big thing. And then lastly, I want us to see the slide there, which shows what's happening now. We're involved in sort of full-on ministry with baptisms happening and projects happening. It's really wonderful what God has done, how He's taken us from having such a primitive understanding of mission, not being involved in leadership at all, and then God has kind of led us down that pathway where we actually have to admit that we are leaders. Reluctantly, we have to admit that we're involved in leadership.
I must admit, I really like those 𝗠𝗶𝘀𝗀𝗃 and other flowers in those pools when people get baptised. It's just a beautiful touch.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's lovely.
We do that every time we have a baptism. We have flowers in the pool. It's wonderful.
It's really nice.
Yeah, but for me, we would be the unlikely leaders. And when I think back to the disciples, were they not also unlikely leaders? Just the same. You know, Peter, James, and John, nobody thought that they would end up. They were not leadership material.
And Andrew, they were all just fishermen.
That's right. God, the
only one who thought he was leadership material was Judas.
Yeah.
Because he carried the bag, he did the books, cooked the books.
He had the leadership material, but he lacked the willingness to learn something about leadership. And so...
He lacked the desire for righteousness.
Yeah. And I think really what it was all about was he did not want to become the kind of leader that Jesus was training the disciples to become. When you think about the disciples, they were actually really struggling with the idea of leadership, because when Jesus washed their feet at the Lord's Supper moment, that was when they were all sort of trying to figure out who was going to be the big shot on the team, and who was going to sit on his right hand, who was going to sit on his left. And that sort of vying that was going on in Jesus' presence was repugnant to him. He did not want his disciples to be that way. He wanted them to learn what it meant to be a servant leader. And so that's why he washed their feet at that very moment. Judas went out because he was after his money. That was the real leader. I mean, he was the one with the natural leadership qualities. The others were struggling because they were not good leadership material, but they still, in their ignorance, they were thinking, okay, who's going to be the big shot among us? And Jesus knelt down and washed their feet to show what the real leader was going to become.
But the thing is, though, all the way through, there's different sections in the Gospels where it's saying that they were talking about, well, who's going to be on his right hand and on his left? Who's going to be in charge when Jesus becomes the king? They were all wanting that position. And that stopped them from listening to a lot of what he had to say to them, including the fact that he was going to the cross and then he was going to rise 3 days later. They couldn't remember that because they were so focused on who is going to lead, am I going to get the top position?
You just said something very important. Servant leadership is not something you understand intellectually. Well, you can try to understand intellectually, but the willingness to become the servant is what paves the way for it to be understood properly. And so it's actually an experiential thing, that when we are willing to become not just leaders, like I wasn't even willing to be any kind of a leader, let alone a servant leader, but when we are willing to become leaders, then God asks us to become servant leaders, which is quite different from what is naturally in our minds. You know, when we see leaders in the world, when we think of leadership in the world, our minds immediately started thinking of kind of like the boss or the CEO or the manager or whatever. And God needs those people to take those positions. But the leadership qualities that Jesus particularly wanted to bring into the team was the concept of servant leadership. And that is something that it started to grow, sort of deepen in my understanding. And it's through being thrown into leadership, the unwilling leader, the unlikely leader, being thrown into leadership, having to learn not only what leaders are, but also what servant leadership is all about. That's been an eye-opening experience for me, and that's what I wanted to share on this interview. Is what exactly are the things that can help someone who's maybe someone in the community or someone's watching, a viewer who's watching today, if they are really wanting to become a servant leader, they recognize that we should become leaders, recognize that we should become servant leaders. Okay, what is it that makes a person into a servant leader? Is that okay if we go through that?
It's not a matter of somebody growing up saying, I am going to lead, I am going to lead, I am going to get this managerial job, I am going to be the CEO of whatever. That's the wrong attitude.
Well, leadership...
In most cases. If you're following it and God is leading you through that, that's one thing, but you still have to be a servant leader regardless.
I think there are people who are ambitious to be leaders, to have position and power and authority. But in general, it doesn't actually work, because leaders are almost always given authority by somebody else, or by an organization, or by a ministry, or whatever it might be, a corporation or whatever. Leaders are given that authority. They're either appointed or they either that or they grow from scratch and inherit the leadership role. But in general, people they either earn it or they're given it by somebody else. In terms of leadership, that's a role of leadership. But I don't think that's what Jesus was. He didn't emphasize position very much, because there is a need for position. But what Jesus emphasized was leadership qualities that apply to everybody, regardless of whether they have a position or not. And that's something that I think every disciple of Christ should have. Leadership qualities in discipleship, in mission. In other words, we should all be missionaries, we should all be disciples, we should all be leaders, at least have the spirit of leadership. Because a person who, like a mother who has no position in life, seemingly feels that she doesn't have much of a role of leading or much authority, can be a powerful leader if she has the spirit of leadership, which is really the the spirit of discipleship.
Yes.
So
because you are leading your children.
Yeah, you're leading your children. So I think we should try to, and this is what I've tried to do, is try to understand what are the qualities that make a person into a servant leader. And that's what I'd like to go through.
Okay then, go ahead.
All right, well, let me tell you what I have discovered is very important about leadership. And that is that a leader is somebody who's a make-it-happen person. That's kind of, we recognize people as natural leaders. If you can see a group of people and you can see somebody in the team who's trying to make it happen, you know, somebody who's got a mindset of, let's make this thing work. They're team-oriented, they're sort of group-oriented, but their main focus is not on themselves. Their focus is on making it happen.
Getting a result.
Yeah. So, and what I've noticed, and I've learned from the Bible, is that there are some people who are really good at that. And usually what they do is they use the spirit of encouragement as their main sort of tool to get things to happen. They're encouraging people. And I really love the story of Barnabas in the Bible, because Barnabas his name means son of encouragement. And he was given that name by the disciples because of his character. He was actually, I forget what his real name was. Do you remember his real name? I think it was Simon or something, but he was actually given the name Barnabas by the apostles because he was such an encouraging guy. And you can see the story of Barnabas with Paul and Mark. And the reason I like the story of Barnabas is that Mark was a bit of a loser, or he couldn't take the pressure. Yeah, he couldn't take the pressure.
He was only young.
Under pressure. He was irresponsible. He ran away from the work. And that's something that happened to me. because when we were in Zimbabwe, we were doing Bible studies with people, and the local conference picked me up, asked me to be a minister of a church, just a little baby one, a baby minister under a pastor. And so I was assisting with looking after a church, and pretty soon there was an argument on the church board which I didn't understand and I was not involved in. But I felt overwhelmed by what was happening, and and I ran away. And so I did exactly what John Mark did. And
so you can feel for John Mark.
I feel for John Mark, and he has the same name as me, Mark. So. But when Barnabas, when that happened, Paul said, "This guy's irresponsible. He's not reliable. Come on, let's leave him behind because he's going to be a liability," which is true. Paul said the truth. He was unreliable and he was a liability. But Barnabas had the spirit of encouragement. And he took him under his wing.
And Barnabas was also his uncle.
Right, well maybe that's why. But Barnabas had that spirit of encouragement. Now, what's interesting about that story, if you look at the Apostle Paul, he was actually in a bit of a bind in Jerusalem earlier on. And the disciples they didn't want to accept him as this new Christian that had been recently killing Christians. And who was it that came in and told him, listen, let's accept him? It was Barnabas, wasn't it? So Barnabas had helped Paul, and now Paul was fed up with Mark, and Barnabas said, no, we've got to look after him, to the point where they actually went different ways, and Paul went off with Silas, I think, and Barnabas and Mark, they started a branch ministry. So
you see how God used that situation though to further the work by splitting Paul and Barnabas into two groups.
Yeah, but isn't it amazing how much Barnabas did for the early church? He was an amazing guy.
Yeah, well, because then Mark went on and wrote the Gospel of Mark.
Right.
But also later on in one of his epistles, Paul talks about how much of a help he has been to him in the gospel.
Right.
So Barnabas trained Mark and he became a very acceptable
worker.
Well, not just acceptable, an important worker in the spreading of the gospel, because he had the encourager looking after him instead of Paul, who was forthright and right. Mission, he was focused on getting to the goal that he had set, and Mark didn't fit that because he ran away.
Yeah, he was distracting from the goal. But the word you just used there was encouragement. Now, encouragement. What is encouragement? Encouragement is when you put you put courage into somebody else, right? You actually give them courage, which is hope. One of the reasons we called our ministry Wings of Hope was because we really believe that hope is a very important thing. It's the first thing you need to give to a patient. When I deal with patients, if I have somebody who's very, very sick, what I always try to remember is you've got to give them hope first of all. And so just recently we had a patient who was hemorrhaging, a post-delivery hemorrhage. And as soon as I realized how bad things were, her blood pressure was dropping drastically, her pulse was racing, I knew that this woman was on the verge of dying. And so I got all my staff I got the IV in, I got my staff to work on everything that was going bad with this patient. And I concentrated on communicating with the patient, trying to encourage her to think positively and to have hope, because I knew that she was only holding on to life by a little thread, and she needed to know that somebody was encouraging her to hang in there. And so I really believe many times that's happened, where when you're dealing with people who are very, very sick, the thing that they most need is hope.
Otherwise they let go.
That's it.
And then they do die.
They do, yeah. Especially when their mind is not very alert, and they're blacking out a bit. That little bit of light that's shining in their lives is often a very important thing to them.
You know, I'm going back to what you're talking about, mission and making things happen, you know, Mark.
Yeah.
Having been out in the world, and there's another sort of leadership, it's called authoritative.
Yeah.
And it's very different to encouragement leadership, because authoritative leadership, you do get things done, by the way, but there isn't that concept of Christianity in it.
Yeah.
It's more, you do as I say.
Yeah.
You know, jump. Well, you only have to ask how high, you know. That's the sort of leadership that we kind of see very prominent, you know, in the world. But servant leadership and encouragement leadership is an aspect of God. God is love.
That's right.
And so when we do it in that manner, the results are phenomenal. They are just so different. Because people then are willing of their own choice to follow through and do what's required. And it makes a big difference. And ministry's about that, by the way.
Yeah. The way I like to put it is that if you want to be a good leader, you've got to learn to give out hope sandwiches. And the hope sandwich is this. Bible promises come down from God, so we share the Word of God with people. That's the top of the sandwich. And then a bit of human encouragement from underneath. That's the bottom of the sandwich. When we give people hope sandwiches, it feeds their hunger. People are hungry for hope. There's so much discouragement in the world. And if there's one word that would describe the experience of man on earth today, it's probably the word fear, which is the exact opposite of the word courage, right? So God wants to give us encouragement, which is hope. Encouragement through hope, a hope sandwich. And isn't that your maiden name, Hope?
No,
Yeah?
but it is involved.
In your family, you have the name Hope in your family, a great name. And but the word fear is probably, the other day I was trying to think about it, I was trying to think, what word would describe the experience of man on planet Earth today? Like everybody, not only rich and poor, uneducated, educated, children, parents, male, female, every single person on planet Earth. If you tried to think of one word that described the experience of every single person in this day and age, what would it be? And I think it would be just what Jesus said, men's hearts failing them for fear, for the things that are coming on the earth.
The word that comes to me is uncertainty. There is so much uncertainty, and uncertainty breeds fear.
Exactly. But what's the opposite of fear? The opposite of fear is courage. Okay? And so what we can give people is encouragement, and encouragement is hope. So I think the spirit of encouragement, the spirit of giving people hope is what actually drives people to, motivates them to move. And that's what leadership is all about, making things happen by giving people hope and giving them encouragement. That's a very simple concept, but if we want to be involved in servant leadership, that's a kind of like a very obtainable target. For somebody like myself, if somebody when I was 18 years old said to me, listen, if you want to be a leader, all you have to do is start giving people encouragement and hope. That puts you in the leadership category, because you are starting to lead people with that hope out of the darkness and discouragement of the world.
When you give people encouragement, they feel a warmth.
Yeah.
They feel like somebody likes them.
Yeah. Yeah.
They feel like somebody has their interests at heart.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they want to do well. They want to do what they're asked to do, because they're encouraged that you can do this.
That's it. Yeah.
It builds up a picture in their minds that I can actually achieve something.
Yeah.
And not only that, it builds a rapport, a friendship, a relationship with the encourager that wouldn't exist if the encourager didn't do that encouraging. It could build a fence otherwise, but it pulls down fences.
Yeah.
It pulls down walls.
There's a lot of stuff on the web now about sort of motivational material on the web about, motivating yourself to do stuff. But hope is in a different category. Hope is really based on inspiration. That's what hope sandwich is. There is some human element in it. We can give people hope from a human point of view, but genuine hope actually comes from the Lord, and based on His promises. That's an inspired desire to do something based on God's word. So what you're saying there is so true. When we give people hope and we see potential in people, and from a Christian point of view, a spiritual point of view, based on the Bible, instead of just getting them motivated to do something, they're actually inspired, which is something more heavenly than just motivation. You know, motivation can be quite human. We can sort of, oh, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna be a so and so. I can do this, or I can become a missionary, or whatever. But somebody who's inspired to become a missionary, or is inspired to do something for somebody else. Inspire means the Holy Spirit is within them. Inspired to do something is breathed by God, and so this is different from motivation.
And it's so much deeper and so much more powerful.
More powerful, yeah. So I think a servant leader works on inspiration through hope that is heavenly. It's an inspired hope that comes from God. Like we quote from, what's it, Titus 2:13. I'll just read the text. It says, looking for that blessed hope and the glorious appearing of the great God and our Saviour Jesus Christ. And then 1 Peter 3:15, which says, sanctify the Lord God in your hearts and be ready always to do what?
Give an account. To
give an answer to every man that asks you a reason for the hope that's in you with meekness and fear. In other words, people who see that hope shining in your eye and they say, where did you get that inspiration from? Where did you get that hope? How can you be so full of courage?
Positive.
How can you be so full of courage and so inspired to do what you're doing? That is what people are going to ask us. The question is, are we ready to share that?
But the blessed hope. What an inspiration. What a motivating power that is to stay faithful and to keep on going forward and to not fear death.
Isn't that the underlying, that's like the pinpoint of our message, is the blessed hope. Everything is based on that. Hope.
The coming of Jesus.
In a future with Jesus. That's
forever.
It. That's what we're looking forward to.
Yes.
I like the thought too, Mark, that the leaders ask questions. And it's very important, because if you ask questions, you know then how to make a right decision.
Right.
And that's part of a quality of a leader, is to be able to make decisions that are for the benefit of all, not just in one situation or an individual.
But to be willing to ask questions to find out even how to do something.
That's
or
right.
ask other people questions that will enable them to think something through to work out how to do it.
This is something that I didn't understand, but I found out through being involved in ministry that questions are the mark of leaders. I'll give an example. When a doctor is interviewing a patient, almost everything he does during the history is ask questions. Yes, John, you've come for a checkup today. How can I help you? What are you battling with? So that's the first question. Then I might ask, what are the symptoms? What makes the symptoms worse? Have you had any treatment for it? Is there anything that relieves the pain? That kind of thing. So doctors have to ask a lot of questions. And a good history-taking doctor is, able to lead the patient to the point where he will actually disclose what the problem is. Before he's been examined, before he's had any blood tests, the history itself is so important in medical work. Okay, let's switch over to teaching. I'm not involved too much in teaching, but I was asked to do a bit of research to share a few ideas with our teachers in our school, because we started a little primary school. We've got 100 students and we've got 10 teachers, and they feel like they need inspiration. And so I tried to put together a bit of a workshop with some presentations on teaching styles. And I found out that I did come across the idea of inquiry-based learning. Well, actually, I had been introduced to myself when I was going through medical school. We had problem-based learning in medical school, but it's one of the most powerful ways of teaching people, is to ask questions and to get the group of students to ask a question. Okay, let's switch over to church leadership. a chairman of a church board. He stands up, he sits at the front of the meeting, and he says, would anybody like to have the opening prayer? And then the next thing he says, thank you, would anybody, would the secretary please, could you read the minutes? What was the first, what was the, go through the minutes, etc. Is there anybody who would like to approve the minutes? Is anybody who would like to second that? Is there any discussion on the minutes? Shall we take it to a vote? Who is in favour of accepting the minutes from the previous meeting? Okay. Is there another agenda? Secretary, can you read the agenda for the meeting today? Questions, questions, questions. Right through to the end of the meeting. Then he says, who would be willing to take the closing prayer? So he can, a chairman of a meeting can actually ask questions, only questions from the very beginning of a meeting right through to the end without doing anything else. That's what leaders do. Leaders ask questions. And you think about it. What do children do when they, as soon as they can talk, what's the first thing they start doing?
Why?
Daddy, why did this?
Why can't I do this? Why can't I have that?
Questions are in the mind. Children are naturally very inquisitive. And that leadership, that's leadership that wants to become a leader. Because leaders ask questions. And it's a really good way to deal with difficulties. You remember when Jesus, when he was confronted with people, I have a text here where it says, Jesus answered and said to them, they just asked Jesus by what authority he did these things. And he said, I also will ask you one question and you will answer me. And then I will tell you by what authority I do these things. And then he said, the baptism of John, was it from God or from man? So in other words, Jesus asked questions to deal with difficult situations. And that is a very powerful way of dealing with difficulty. If you don't know what to do, then ask questions. It's a great way of dealing with difficult situations.
In fact, Jesus did that over and over again through the Gospels. It tells where he was confronted with people who were trying to hinder his work.
Right, yeah.
And they would usually ask a question, but he would always ask a question back. And that question, anyway, it's just like when they brought the woman caught in adultery. Yeah. And they wanted to stone her, and so they were trying to trap Jesus. Yeah. And what was Jesus' questions? Yeah. Who will cast the first stone?
Yeah, who's going to cast the first stone? Yeah. So, it's just so amazing, just a realization in my mind that leadership is about asking questions. And I found this to be very true, because when you're trying to motivate a group, sometimes if you just stand up there and just tell everybody, okay, this is what we're going to do, it doesn't work very well. But if you ask questions and you ask people, okay, what are we actually trying to achieve? What's our goal? Okay, the group discusses it, the group sets the goal, all right? Okay, if that's the case, then how are we going to achieve this? And then people say, if you put up a few suggestions, then say, but how is that going to work? What do you think? Is that going to work, or do we need to refine it? So far, all I've done is ask questions, but I'm actually, in a humble way, guiding the whole movement of the discussion in the direction of where it needs to go. So in other words, questions puts you on the lower level, doesn't it? When you're asking a question, you're like the student, aren't you? Can you explain this to me? So the idea of a leader who's a servant leader is actually stepping down and asking questions in order to get things done. But it doesn't mean that you don't lead, you still lead. And you still direct, and those questions can be very directing, can be a leading question. It's okay to lead with questions. But the idea of humbling yourself enough to ask, what do you think about this, is very important. And I think, I didn't realize this. If someone had told me this when I was younger, it would have been very helpful to me. If you want to be a leader, then encourage people, give them hope sandwiches, and ask questions. You'll find it'll get you through anything. You know, I'm involved in so many things that I don't know how to do it. For example, we built a hangar. I didn't know how to build a hangar, but I asked questions about how to build a hangar. I didn't know how to do all the solar stuff within at the school. I asked the Lord. I didn't know how to take a boat across the water, I ask people, you know, the whole idea of questions has actually kept me afloat through this whole idea of leadership. Being thrown into leadership, I would not be able to do it if I didn't know how to ask questions. I think it's a really helpful tip for somebody who wants to be involved in leadership.
I think it develops a good quality of servant leadership by asking a lot of questions.
Yeah.
You know, I think also it's very important that we realise you can't be a leader if there are no people.
Yeah.
So a leader is associated with other people.
Yeah.
And what you're really doing is, you know, if you ask questions, you can bring out what is needed for that group and then help them to make the decision, because that's really what servant leadership is about. Yeah. It's not being, you know, authoritative, but it's there to be a means for people to make a decision and everyone get on together, because in the end, that's what we have to do. We have to be united to go forward in mission.
Yeah. It's a good idea what you're saying there about asking questions. Especially when you're in a team environment, if you are the leader and nobody seems to know what to do, the best thing to do is start asking questions that they can then start to say, oh, well, you know, well, maybe if we do this, or oh, we tried that but it didn't work. But within that, you can start to get the ball rolling where people's thought processes work.
Exactly.
And come up with a solution. Or something to try.
To ask questions with no direction in mind would be pointless. But a leader has to ask questions with the end in mind. It's like reverse engineering. So you're asking questions with the object of achieving a decision. Because in the end, we've got to have a decision. And the decision-making power that's in man is another leadership quality, because basically the people who make the decisions, they're the leaders, aren't they? So, and when you think of your own, our physiology, if I decide to get up and walk outside, it's my forehead that's making that decision, isn't it? And it's controlling the rest of the body. So there are people who are gifted with making decisions. But when it comes to servant leadership, the difference is that we actually ask everybody to be involved in the decision-making process. And when we make a decision, we've got to be decisive, because that ability to decide in favor of mission, in favor of God's work, is a quality that's given to man. It's the image of God. I believe it's the image of God in man. It's his can I read a quote to you? Yeah. It says, what you need to understand is the true force of the will. This is the governing power, the leadership power in the nature of man, the power of decision or of choice. Everything depends on the right action of the will. The power of choice God has given to men. It is theirs to exercise. You cannot change your heart. You cannot of yourself give to God its affections, but you can choose to serve Him. You can give Him your will, and then He will work in you to will and to do according to His good pleasure. That's what. Now, when I was young, I didn't understand this at all. I was very indecisive. I had just no capacity to decide anything. I was so confused. But what God has taught me is that you need to be an encouraging person. You need to ask questions. And then you need to make decisions and then stick with those decisions. Because being a decision maker is actually, that's what makes a leader. But if you're a servant leader, you've got to help others. You've got to get the collective body, the corporate structure to make the decision as a body. And that's something. You
have to get everybody else on board, seeing the logic of it, the fact that even though it may be something hard, if you have faith in God, God can move you forward in it.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think too, Mark, it's easy. It's something we need to think about, is that when you look at a leader, what makes him a good leader? And basically, if you get someone who makes wrong decisions one after the other, what happens to his leadership quality? It falls flat. Yeah. Because people know that he's acting on his own and not in the interests of others. It's very important that we understand that, because a servant leader takes into account he's making decisions for a group, and his ability to lead is based on making those good decisions. Yeah.
Yeah. I know time's running out for this program, but I just wanted to get to the last point on servant leadership. The things that I've learned about this is that once you understand the importance of decision making, then you need to go beyond what's the decision aiming for. And that is where we need to be very focused in our goals and persevering in our goals, which is to be involved in mission. And that's something that I was completely devoid of. When I was a young person, I was the sort of person that my big brother used to say, "Don't worry, he'll be over that in about 3 weeks at the most," you know, because I was such a changeable person, always chopping and changing, going to this and that, never sticking at anything. I would like something for a while and then all of a sudden it was gone, and they would say, "Well, what happened to that?" Because I was so unstable as a young person. A lot of young people are very unstable, aren't they? But God wants us to learn the ability to make decisions that are aiming for a goal and that we stick with that goal. And that's the kind of quality that you need when you're involved in mission, when you're involved in ministry. If you don't have the ability to stick through the hard times, perseverance is so important, isn't it?
Well, I think we're tried. You know, our leadership qualities, you know, leaders are tried. What we do in response, you know, you know, we all go through crucibles and we experience hardship, but they are helping to refine and build our characters to be better people.
Yeah, I think
better leaders.
The perseverance, if there's one thing that you need to be successful in life, it's probably perseverance, because perseverance will see you through your own weaknesses, other people's weaknesses, hardships, challenges of every description, and then as you go through, eventually those things will drop off. So perseverance, the stick with it quality is so important, something that I just did not have when I was young. I did not know the power of encouragement. I did not know the power of asking questions. I didn't know about this decisiveness stuff. I was just totally indecisive. When it came to being persevering and sticking with it, I was devoid of that quality. But God has turned me into someone who's a bit more stubborn for His will than I would have been as a young person, and helped me to push through and hang in there.
Right now, Mark, I would like to direct people to the address roll, to where they can contact you if they want to find out more about your ministry, or even the things that we're talking about, because this concept of servant leadership is so important for people to understand. These are the details where you can get in contact with Dr. Mark Turnbull in Vanuatu.
If you'd like to contact Dr. Mark Turnbull and support the work of Wings of Hope in Vanuatu, you may do so in the following ways. Their mailing address is 51 Southlink Street, Parkinson, Queensland 4115. That's 51 Southlink Street, Parkinson, Queensland 4115. Email them on 𝗧𝗵𝗍𝗀@gmail.com. That's the number 4, hishope, all one word, @gmail.com. You can donate to them via their website. The address is www.forhishope.com/give. Contact them today.
I hope you've got those details. You know, Vanuatu is a very interesting place, and you know, we live in comfort around the world, many places, many don't, but in Vanuatu, Mark is doing a work with his family there that he didn't imagine, I'm sure, when he was a young person doing, but God has used him in a mighty way, and I'd encourage you to support this ministry and the work in Vanuatu. And you know, we're going to be talking about a few more things in other programs, but right now I just want to say, Mark, what do you convey for servant leaderships for anyone who wants to do mission like you've embarked upon?
John, I just believe that God's called all of us to be disciples. He's called all of us to be missionary disciples. And that's going to call us into leadership, inevitably. Whether we have a position of leadership or not, the fact is everyone who is involved in discipleship or involved in being a Christian, if they follow through with what God is leading them into, they're going to end up in some kind of leadership. Leadership is something that most of us feel inadequate for. We feel like we don't have the basic elements. But it is something that can be taught, and it's something that can be learned. And people who are struggling with this, they just need to understand some of the basic ideas. Firstly, if you want to be involved in servant leadership, which is the kind of leadership that Jesus taught us to be involved in, try to encourage other people. Try to focus on giving them God's promises, which is promises, hope from above, and then a bit of human encouragement from below, which I call a hope sandwich. Try to give them hope, because this is the most attractive thing in a world of fear and anxiety that we live in. The second thing that we can do to help people to become leaders, they need to understand the basic idea of asking questions, because asking questions will get you out of a bind. You don't have to know everything when you become a leader. By being a make it happen person, you basically have to ask the right questions. Asking good questions will give you good answers. And so becoming a person who asks questions regardless of the situation will get you out of difficulties, whether you're preaching, teaching, healing, leading in a group, organizing meetings, or if you're doing something even on an individual level, talking to an individual about things, and if you don't know what to say, you can still ask questions. So asking questions will get you out of a bind. It will also expose what you need to do, so you know what to do next. It'll help you along the way. So asking questions is a great pointer if you're trying to learn how to be involved in servant leadership. It also puts you in the lower level, the sort of humble role when you're involved in leadership. The third thing that we can do is that we can emphasize the importance of decision making. And decision making is so important. And then lastly, we need to be persevering, and we need to stick with it, John, because those are the qualities that we can learn and develop as sprouting leaders.
That's right.
One of the things you've got to remember, as you've said, that if you are a Christian, you really do become a leader. Yeah. Because if you are leading someone to Christ, you are leading. You are a leader.
That's it.
And so that's basically what you're talking about, isn't it?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
And that sort of leadership will help you in leading people in other ways where God can make you a servant leader. We're all born to be servant leaders as Christians. And I've really enjoyed this talk. It's been great, and I'm sure that you've learnt a lot from it as well. May God bless you until we see you on the next program.